Would you recommend the use of Signal for classified information to be shared between folks who have access to?
Again, we followed the recommendation, almost the demand, to use end-to-end encryption, but there was no classified information shared.
Did you speak to Secretary Hegseth about his decision to share detailed information on the specifics of an imminent military strike?
What we spoke about, Senator, was a highly successful mission that did something that the Biden administration did not do, was actually target the Houthi leadership. We subsequently saw a ceasefire, an increase in shipping, and a drop in attacks on our ships.
Well, look, here's what I hear on this exchange, and I want to get to the UN point. At the time, you took responsibility for having added a journalist inadvertently to a Signal chat. But it doesn't seem to me that the administration's taken any action to make sure this doesn't happen again. There's been no consequences, and yet the president continues to denounce those who leak information. We both know Signal is not a secure way to convey classified information. And I was hoping to hear from you that you had some sense of regret over sharing what was very sensitive, timely information about a military strike on a commercially available app that's not, as we both know, the appropriate way to share such critical information.
Again, Senator, I think where we have a fundamental disagreement is there was no classified information on that chat.
I'm going to move on for a moment, but we've got plenty more to discuss on that point. China in the UN system, there was plenty of agreement on this side of the dais, and I think with you, that we need to combat anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias in the UN. We need to ensure taxpayer dollars are well spent. We need to engage in our world. And from your service on the China Task Force, you know very well what a central challenge for us China is. Yet across organizations, the ITU, the FAO, UNESCO, WIPO, I think the only way we successfully push back on China's influence is by being at the table, driving reform. When President Trump withdrew from the World Health Organization, the Chinese sent their largest delegation ever to the next meeting. They've contributed $500 million. They're now the biggest contributor. I can understand some of the frustrations or concerns that led to the withdrawal from UNESCO, but in the last Congress, with Israeli support, I led our rejoining UNESCO. We've talked about, you've mentioned earlier today, standard-setting bodies as being essential. How do you balance a budget request that dramatically reduces our contributions to the UN with needing to be at the table to fight for the standards, whether it's telecommunications, civil aviation, intellectual property? You just waved, here's this great big list of organizations. Many of them do critical things. How are you going to strike that balance appropriately, sir?
Thank you, Senator, and it was good to discuss this with you. I will point out in the President's budget request there is funding for IAEA, for the International Civil Aviation Organization, for the Organization Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, for the ITU, for the IMO and maritime, and so I look forward to working with you and working with this committee on how we make those decisions of where we engage and then how we engage. But I think we're in violent agreement that we have to block and tackle Chinese influence.
Would you pledge to not support just unilateral withdrawal from these organizations?
I will certainly support and follow the Secretary and the President's guidance as we weigh that engagement through these reviews.
Thank you. Thanks, sir.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Waltz, I'd like to start with you, and if it's all right, I'd like to start by going a little deeper into something related to what Senator Barrasso asked you a moment ago. Membership of the UN's three-member Board of Auditors is currently shared by three countries: China, France, and Brazil. Now, this is a body that's appointed by the UN General Assembly, of course, and it's tasked with generating accurate accounts of UN funds and UN programs, where the money's going and so forth. But an audit is, of course, by definition, it's only as reliable as its auditor. And the UN's current Board of Auditors not only gives China a seat at the table, but it actually names China as the lead auditor for organizations, including UNRWA, which had terrorists on its payroll, at least through 2023. Some would say longer than that. The Environmental Program, despite the fact that the environmental program has been exploiting the developing country status to access environmental-related financial assistance for a number of countries, including some that arguably don't deserve that designation. And the UN headquarters, which, as we all know, is based in New York. So my first question to you is, how can we comfortably fund these UN entities, knowing that at some point in the process, our dollars will become commingled into these international accounts, accounts that many of our strategic competitors and right now our pacing threat may be in charge of auditing? But how do we deal with that?
Thank you, Senator Lee, and again, thank you for the kind introduction earlier. I share the concern. If, again, as I take as a first principle, sitting down with my, firefighters, welders, and small business owners and saying, look them in the eye and saying, I know exactly where your dollar's going and it's being well spent. I don't think we could say that at this point. And if it's, it's one thing for it to come out of their hands into the federal government, then it goes from the federal government over to a multinational entity. Then it goes down to an agency, 15 of whom have their own separate boards and separate agendas. And then I know something that's important to the chairman and a number of you, then it gets, in some cases, commingled with other international, like the African Union. Of course, we don't know exactly where it's going. I pointed out earlier, in the early 90s, actually in the Clinton administration, some folks in this body said enough is enough, and we got the closest thing we have, the Office of Internal Oversight and Investigation. It's the closest thing that there is to an IG, right, but it still reports to itself. It's not truly independent, and it's not necessarily just on the money side. If you have whistleblowers that say there's fraud, waste, and abuse, it basically comes back to itself, or even things like sexual abuse out in the UN's peacekeeping forces. Right. We need an actual independent entity that we all have confidence in to understand where this money and other nefarious activities are happening.
Right. And then it becomes sort of like a self-licking ice cream cone. The self-auditing rogue actor within the UN is not necessarily one to be trusted.
The UN's budget has gone from $15 billion to $65 billion in the last 20 years, and I don't think we're getting the commensurate return on our dollar.